Welcome to the eCommerce Growth Show, brought to you by Segmentify.
Hello everyone, this is Carlos again for another episode of the eCommerce Growth Show. Today we're joined by Michelle Evans. So Scott, you can introduce her and we get to the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Carlos, and welcome to another episode. Is this our sixth episode, Carlos, that we've recorded so far? Excellent.
Yeah.
So excited to have Michelle Evans join us today. If we look at or talk about Michelle's bio, she is or oversees the global digital consumer research at Euromonitor. And has been at that for some time. She has been recognized multiple times as a leader and a voice and a pundit when we come to talking about digital commerce, when we're talking about retail, when we're talking about just commerce in general. And you can, I think most recently, she was yet again on the Rethink Top 100 Retail Influencers list. So if you've done anything, have any interest in retail and commerce and done any sort of research into what's going on, you've probably bumped in to content by Michelle that offers very detailed insight into retail at a global, really from a global perspective. So Michelle, pleasure to have you join us today.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for the introduction and for the invite to join the show. Always good to share the stage with you. When we first met way back when we used to travel to places or conferences.
Yeah, that seems like another era. I think that was around 2016 when we first met. Mm-hmm. It was in Sao Paulo at the eCommerce Brazil event. We were both keynote speakers at that event. And, I will say that it was very memorable for me, not only that I got to meet, awesome people like yourself, but that was probably the biggest room full of people I ever stood up in front of and did a live talk. That was a really big show.
Yeah, I think it was my biggest as well. Yeah.
I think there was it was a 5,000, plus room at the time. So it was a little scary, especially being, not a Portuguese speaker and, more than half the room, relying on translation to even, hear what I was saying. So that was crazy. So what have you been doing over the last year, with, the opportunities to kind of go out and speak to people in person? How's your life been?
Well, it's drastically different for sure, much like everyone else. I was traveling all the time. And like you mentioned, I was in a global role. So I think in 2019, I went to 10 countries for work alone, where either I was going to client engagements or conferences. And then, I think as things were taking off last year, a lot of the first opportunities were coming out of APAC. So those quickly got canceled and, then in Europe and then in the States. So I never traveled anywhere in 2020. And obviously I'm still kind of grounded now. So it's been all virtual. I've been doing the virtual conferences and getting used to Zoom and other platforms and presenting virtually to clients. So it's a different ball game to speak through this type of setup and whatnot.
Yeah, it was a crazy year. It was sad to watch all of my frequent flyer status dissolve into nothing.
Yes.
Which is where I sit today. Basically, it's not going to be nearly as much fun to fly when we can return back to it. Because you're going to be right there. I'm just going to be nobody. Yeah.
I remember you guys down in Brazil that we all were members of the same. We all flew generally the same airline. But I took a direct on someone else, and you guys were like, "No, don't do that," because it's all about status, right? And being able to easily jump on flights. And I know I learned a lesson from you because you have been on the road more.
Yeah, no, that was that was an important game to play if you were going to travel a lot, right? Just for your happiness and well-being.
Yes. Yeah.
When you're spending so much time on airplanes. But so hopefully, that's something we can worry about again soon. I guess something to look forward to. Interesting. I think related, to kind of some of the conversation we can have about commerce, is that whole virtual conference phenomenon, that has occurred, because driven, by the pandemic. So, what do you think about the Clubhouse phenomena? That's really, caught a lot of my attention lately.
Yeah, do you think it has staying power? I'm actually an Android user, so I have not been in this game.
You're outsiders.
That's you.
That's you and I can't be part of.
I didn't really realize that it was iOS only until I asked Carlos why he wasn't on Clubhouse, because it's like built for him, and the kind of things he does, and he really should be there. And then, he told me, well, because we can't, because I have an Android and Android can't play. I assume that is something that will change at some point, but I don't know. Yeah.
It somewhat reminds me of, and I'm kind of forgetting the exact language. Was it Twitter chats? Do you remember that? Where there would be a hashtag and you kind of, get everyone to join for a certain hour and you talk about X topic. Obviously, this is, the video adds a stronger element to it, but it sort of reminds me of that.
Yes, I had not really paid, I sort of knew Clubhouse was out there, but had not paid a lot of attention to it. Thought it was really kind of for, the cool kids to go out, and hang out. And then, all of a sudden I started getting invites to join these groups of people that I used to go to conferences with and, be on stage with. And would, be on panels with and, and that sort of thing. And I was like, oh, this could be a really, great opportunity, since I've been sort of anchored to home for so long.
Yeah. And I think that's the issue. It's like you can do virtual conferences where it's sharing presentations and you can even kind of replicate the panel experience. But it's more so those conversations, and especially, it's one thing if we want to meet up at a certain time and talk, but it's more of those organic things that would happen at shows. Like going to the Brazil show, obviously we started speaking because we were both there in person, right? And I don't know that would have happened. Like it's that meeting people and talking and starting the conversation and whatnot.
I agree. I think thinking of just that one show, that eCommerce Brazil, I made connections like yourself, and actually several others that are, kind of lifetime connections now. Based on that one show. It's and that's missing from some of these.
I agree. I do have kind of stronger connections that came out of that show too.
I regularly, I've been the Brazilian contingent that comes to NRF in New York, before we cut that down, I've been regularly participating in their events as a direct result of that one trip.
Yeah.
So anyway, very interesting. Well, so in the case of, as Carlos and I were thinking, ahead of time about, what could we talk about with Michelle Evans, you have, fortunately, because of what you do for a living, provided, far more, material in your research than we could ever cover. So there's no lack of interesting things we could talk about. Including, one of your more popular articles on Forbes, when I was sort of poking around, was your 2027 predictions for how COVID will change the retail in the future. Yeah. And I know there's a companion article that's the 2021 version now, almost 12 months later, not quite 12 months later when you publish that. So I think it might be interesting to kick around some of those insights. And where you got it right, where you got it wrong, and maybe why in some of those cases. So if I started out with the first thing you talk about in your 2020 predictions, you talk about a diversified supply chain in that article, and you talked a lot about the impact of China at the time, which China's been in the news for political and COVID and as well as I think the U.S. has a lot better understanding about how important China is in our supply chain now after a year of this. So I'd love to hear your comments on what do you think happened over the last year, and where do you think our supply chain is going? Because I don't think our supply chain problems are over. There's still weirdness. To be found. Yeah.
I think awareness is a key word that you used, where I think what happened kind of put a limelight on the strength of China and how much they're embedded in everything we did or we do. So I do think there's that awareness, and increasingly companies are looking to diversify those supply chains, but those kind of changes don't happen on a dime, for sure. It's a very intricate type of thing. So, I'm sure it won't get to, there's probably to some degree a stronger desire to do so in the middle of the crisis, and then probably will get executed off the back of the crisis. I'll give you that. But I think we will still see some greater diversification.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a more contentious relationship with China maybe is not going to change anytime soon. That even with a very different administration, that they're not.
Aside, there is the political ramifications too. Yeah.
And so when you saw a lot of companies, as really as an insurance policy, move, production and other things to Taiwan or Vietnam or wherever, just to, because of the tariffs and all the other uncertainties that were going on, is that genie out of the bottle permanently now?
I would say, and I think you almost have the two-pronged attack too, when like those situations were happening regardless of the crisis, and then the crisis kind of exacerbated all the problems. So I think you'll see some of that diversification happen because of the first, and then the crisis inspiring more. Like, I think it was Japan, the Japanese government gave money to motivate companies to move out of China, I believe, if I remember that piece of news correctly. So I think there's an impetus on sort of both sides to shift that.
Well, I guess there's other, besides just straight, sort of commerce concerns, there were, literally national security concerns and other things, that sort of bubbled up as well.
Yeah, and I think when you think about the political issues too, what comes to mind as well is like Jack Ma, and how he disappeared for a while, and they didn't know what happened to him, and essentially, like, he spoke out against the government and kind of went into hiding after that. And I think it does raise concerns when it comes to partnering with companies in China or investing in companies like Alibaba, right? Because they are operating or headquartered within China. So what will the Communist Party there decide to do? I think that's a lot different than a company in the States that obviously faces different political challenges.
Yeah, interesting. So do you think, those challenges, did that permanently, sort of put a dividing line between, where Amazon's going to, be, doing their growth and marketing versus Alibaba, as an example, do you think?
I don't know. Obviously, when you think about, You often strike that comparison, China versus the US, like they're clearly both massive markets, both massive e-commerce markets. You have kind of the Amazon versus Alibaba player. And you also have, like in other industries too, like the PayPal versus Alipay and all of that jazz. I think because of the Chinese government not allowing the foreign entities to set up shop there, you always have that kind of Chinese counterpart across all of these industries that are allowed to sort of take root and grow that homegrown operation. So, I think, clearly it becomes a problem when they export out of said country, but they are on other sides of the, different sides of the world. So I'm not sure the degree to which they'll necessarily run into each other. Obviously, somewhere like India could be a spot where Amazon is pushed more into, but clearly there's challenges between India and China anyways. But Amazon, a lot of its business is still out of the States. Clearly, it's made a big push into Europe. So I think it's a little bit different than if geographically the countries were closer and the strategies were similar.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's move on. Let's talk about, in 2020, your next prediction was acceleration of e-commerce, which in 2020, who knew what was going to happen, right? It was very, there was an awful lot of uncertainties, and I think that, if you go to look at what you predicted in 2021, that continues, and maybe not as, you didn't have to go as far out on a limb by the time we got to 2021 on that one. But where were the surprises for you there and the acceleration of e-commerce, which clearly occurred?
Yeah, I think e-commerce and just the general growth was a story that was going to be a headline in 2020, regardless of COVID. We knew, that was going to be the fastest growing channel and still will be. And obviously we saw the spike brought forward by the crisis. In terms of surprising results, I think some of this is still playing out. Clearly, we're all kind of stuck at home still, and some of these habits are continuing. I think it's going to be the degree to which all of this sticks. So in our surveys of industry professionals, 3/4 expect that this crisis-inspired boom will continue. Now, the unknown is the degree to which that level continues. And we still expect positive growth moving forward. Obviously, the growth rate will slow. What will it slow to? I'm more of the mindset that I think some folks put out there the idea that it will be e-commerce all the time and stores are irrelevant and all of that. And I don't think that's the case. I think there's going to be a pullback on e-com. The first part of this conversation, we were talking about the idea of going back to conferences and the idea of enjoying that. I think people do want to get out. They do want to experience things. So stores will have a role to play in the future. I think what this period showed us was kind of a draconian preview of a world where consumers just shopped online and avoided stores, right? It changed very much overnight what the role of each were. But I don't think that's the reality in the next few years. I think there's going to be a snapback, and the challenge for retailers is going to be, and it depends on the product you sell, like that's going to be a very different experience with channels and whatnot, and what the value is of e-com and how many virtual experiences you need to provide and whatnot for this, to sell and market your products. But, I think fundamentally the role of the store will change, how consumers view it, the functions it serves, because, in the past, going to a store was very much about shopping. Clearly during COVID, it became very transactional in nature. Consumers try to avoid the store. And then e-com used to be transactional, and now it is, kind of the shopping destination. So it's getting that sort of balance right. And I'd say we're seeing that somewhat in our data. We have consumer surveys that we've fielded. There's 3 of them that have gone out over the course of the last year or so. So pre-crisis, kind of the late March, early April timeframe, and then the beginning of this year. And you do see that massive spike in digital channels at both the research and purchase stage. And it's not to say we're at pre-crisis levels, we're not, but there is in our most recent fielding kind of a slight pullback we're seeing across all products and services, where it's just a bit down from that height of last spring. So I think consumers, even though we are still very much in this kind of lockdown mentality, are pulling back and finding some of that balance.
So yeah, so if I were in your survey, I would definitely be in the camp that the changes, the growth and shift is permanent. Mm-hmm. I think it definitely doesn't all reset back to the way it was. It's done, and we've learned some things about what we can do online without actually going to a store, and there are certain things that are still more than adequate, right? Are good enough or better than the way we did it before. And then there are other things that you're right, it's not as good, it's not as fun. I feel like there is a huge pent up surge, waiting to happen. As soon as you feel safe. For my wife and I, we've been waiting to be fully vaccinated, and that's happened for us, and so we're now a lot more comfortable about going out into the stores, masked and still doing being safe, but not worried about catching I'm in the hospital in a respirator version of COVID, right? In the process of shopping. So it feels a lot safer to go out and do. And you've of course had folks that never cared one way or another anyway, just want the opportunity to to be able to get out of there, get out of lockdown. You look.
You're in the Dallas area, right?
I am. And I meant to ask you at the beginning of our conversation, where are you joining us from? Are you in Chicago?
Yeah, I'm in Chicago, and I'm in the city proper. And something that I've noticed over the last month or so is traffic patterns. Like, they've been picking up here, and it's not to say they're not all going to retail stores per se, but they are going somewhere. And I would imagine, that tells me that consumers, as more are vaccinated, as we, have, we're reaching the lowest level of positivity rates here. Not to say, but there's, kind of that bit more of normalcy coming, I would think, and stores are likely going to benefit from that too.
Yeah, now traffic has picked up here as well. And you can just get up and watch the morning news and listen to the traffic report and see that there are more people out and about because there are more wrecks and jams and other things than where we're happening before. And for the times when I do need to get out, I'm even on the weekends, I'm quite surprised at the amount of traffic that's out on the road. So things feel almost back to the same on that front. So what about live streaming and that phenomenon?
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite topics I've written about over the last year. Obviously it's one that emerged out of China. It was taking root before COVID ever became something. But really COVID drove live streaming in China to more, it really took off last year, where a vast more amount of consumers were using it. And then we saw it start to get exported, across, popping up in LATAM and in North America, Western Europe, etc. Western players like Amazon and Facebook pushing it out more. Amazon had its Amazon Live in place before COVID-19, but they added influencers to that platform mid 2020, so in the middle of COVID. And Facebook launched their live platform on across their different properties in mid 2020. So that was a COVID inspired kind of push. So certainly that is something that has been taken off. It is interesting. It does ring with a certain subset of the population. Obviously, it skews younger. It skews towards a lot of emerging markets. It kind of follows that same pattern of social commerce that we saw a few years ago. I think it's kind of the reincarnation almost of that experience. I think for those like Americans, you kind of relate the experience somewhat to shopping on QVC or the Home Shopping Network. But I think obviously this appeals to a younger generation, but I think there is a stronger kind of one-on-one connection between the host and the consumer, where you can really ask a lot of questions and get them answered and play probably a more active role in the content and whatnot. So yeah, it's definitely one that it has gained a lot of steam off the back of COVID. And I think it's something that will continue from the vantage point. I think this was coming down the pipeline regardless. I think COVID accelerated it because we were all at home and went to virtual experiences. So I do think post-COVID, it will stay around. I think it's a matter of, I think that it's a matter of the degree to which it does stick. And I think it's more so probably certain types of products and certain types of experiences where if you're really adding value, then it will have some staying power.
Yeah, and so actually, my current role at PowerFront, we provide live streaming. That's one of our products at this point. So I'm glad to have the affirmation from you because we believe that as well, and we're inspired by what we saw in China to create our product and introduce it. So I'll have to say that you're right that there are definitely certain sort of verticals where it really fits very well just right out of the box. We're seeing a ton of activity in beauty with this as an example, but we have some of like Swatch is an example of a customer of ours that is doing some really interesting things with live stream, and we have some other customers that I won't talk about here, but I think we're going to have some really interesting use cases for it. So I think that that commerce enabled live streaming, where it's kind of a seamless experience from the I saw it, I talked about it, I loved it, and now I'm going to buy it. That's the that's the ticket, right? So I think we continue to see growth in that area.
Yeah, definitely. Like if you think about the Chinese consumer, I'm not surprised it started there, and I'm not surprised it probably will be there, that it always has the most traction. Because when you think about that kind of consumer, they always, like, you can look at a website in China versus the States as an example, and just the amount of product detail that's provided in China, because they have that thirst for knowledge. They want to research things. I remember talking to Alibaba once about how they were working with a company and the amount of detail that was being included for a private label olive oil, which in the States, no one would care about. That you're buying it because it's cheaper, it says some key words on it. And so I think there is an element of the consumer. I think the beauty comment you made kind of speaks to the personal nature of beauty or apparel products. And the other area that I think about is ones where demos really help. So if you think about maybe like Bissell had a big push on 11/11 and launched a specific product, where those are the kind of products where demos help, where you'd like to see how to use it. So I think that's another key vertical too.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next. At the rate I'm going, we won't get through them all. The boost of contactless payments. So, if thinking about over the the past year, do you think did the boost happen that you thought was going to happen? How are the incumbents innovating the payment? Incumbents, and who are the up and comers?
Yeah, I think contactless is definitely, it was taking off, but it definitely received a nice boost during COVID. You had players like Visa and MasterCard work with governments and organizations around the world to increase contactless limits to reduce the need for a signature or PIN and executing the transaction. I think that only helps the trajectory long term. The kind of thing that contactless had going against it was just consumers reducing their time in stores, period. But, in general, contactless rose. And then off the back of that, digital wallets cross both the in-store, they could be NFC that mimic the contactless experience, or could be ones that you use online. So in general, wallets saw a nice uptick of that. I think in terms of interesting players in this, obviously Visa and MasterCard types are seeing that sort of uptick as established players. I think there's been a lot of activity from someone like PayPal in this domain. Clearly, they started as an online wallet, but have, over the course of their existence, have tried to push more into store-based as well, since 85% of transactions are getting executed there for goods. So they launched their QR code this year. Obviously, they acquired iZettle a couple of years ago to make that kind of push on that sort of dongle for storekeepers to accept those kind of payments. So they're an interesting player. I think in terms of others, there are ones like across different regions that have certainly gained traction as well. But that's one, more so in the US, I think of.
What about the guys that are doing, kind of buy the big purchase you want and pay it out over, X number
Buy
of
now,
payments?
pay later.
Yeah.
They have taken off quite a bit. Afterpay out of Australia, I'm gonna try to quote this. I feel like their share price doubled over the year. I think.
I'll tell you from personal experience, because their founder came and met with me back when I was still at Neiman Marcus, and they were just a startup, right?
Yeah.
He came and met with me, and I was so impressed that when they went public, I bought some of their stock, and it's was a very smart decision on my part. I'm very happy with where the value of that is today. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So all of those players have taken off. Clearly, they're benefiting from the e-com boom. They're also benefiting from kind of the budget, those seeking out to keep a budget this year amid the economic concerns as well. So they benefit there. It tends to, I think, be embraced more by younger consumers.
Absolutely.
Was a big driver. I don't know long term what your thoughts are about the business model. Obviously, merchants are, covering some of this, and it's more costly for them. So I don't know if long term it's something where they work with these third parties, or if there's some sort of a private layaway program that they create, for their customers. In general, maybe that's how retailers are competing nowadays, where it is all about accepting all the payments that consumers want to pay with, right? But this one's more costly than accepting a Visa card even.
I think especially, I think about the luxury business model where, the struggle has been to bring new, younger customers into the fold. Right. You've sort of, you are already the affluent mature customer already knows about you and shops with you, or they don't. But trying to attract that new customer that doesn't maybe hasn't reached that point in their life where they have that income level to just pay cash for that handbag or their shoes or that whatever that aspirational item is that they want. That this is a really interesting way to go grow your business and grow that loyalty. For that younger customer that you can build into a long-term relationship.
Yeah, and it must be that appeal to the younger customer. Like PayPal launched their Pay in 4 this year, and when I was buying my husband a birthday gift, I decided to opt into that. It didn't cost me anything, and I just wanted to see what that experience was like. So I'm getting text and email, every time this next payment happens 4 times over, and I could have paid outright. Like it wasn't a big deal. So I think as a more established adult, I don't know what the real draw is per se. I know what is said is for millennials, it's more that budgeting idea. Like you are ultimately going to be paying for it. I hope the money is there or coming in. But from my vantage point, I didn't personally see a huge benefit.
Yeah, no. So look, there might be some sort of a gamey or techie thing I wanted that cost $200, and if that showed up on the credit card, I'd have to explain that to my significant other. But in 4 payments of $50, it doesn't really trigger any alarms.
You're smart.
Okay, let's see. How about reevaluation of re-commerce? Re-commerce.
Yeah, so that's all the secondhand thing. And I think when I wrote that column, and this was back in the spring, I think it published last May. This is the heart of the lockdowns and such in the States. I was thinking a lot more about the health concerns, right?
Yeah, Jeremy secondhand items.
Yeah. And I thought it might see a dampening of that a bit. I think probably some of this comes down to the individual consumer as well. I'm sure some still have those concerns, and I don't know, you could watch news reports every other day and get some other information in terms of how this virus is transmitted, especially during that time frame. But the other thing that's helped re-commerce is just in general the economic crisis. And when you have those moments in time, consumers turn to budgeting, they turn to debit cards, they turn to secondhand items, and all those.
And think about how look at luxury items, how lightly used they probably were during this time period.
Yeah.
As well. So not a lot of opportunity to go put wear and tear on a lot of this stuff, to be honest. So, I think that I kind of agree with what I think you're saying, which is that sort of the trajectory has sort of remained similar.
I think that was the one prediction where it's a little bit wobbly. There's obviously a lot of different factors playing into it. In general, the secondhand market was taking off, and as you're able to digitize that more, it makes it a lot easier. And if vaccines help with getting COVID under control, then I think in general the economic crisis that obviously is going to continue. Like there's the haves and have not of this downturn, but those that have not are going to still face an uphill battle, so may turn to those type of products over the next year or so. And
yeah, I mean that's a whole and not my area of expertise either, but that's a whole show in and of itself. When you think about for instance, like the restaurant industry, which has been devastated, and all the folks that have little or no work, during the lockdown. I'm very surprised that the overall kind of global economic impact is not more severe than what we've seen, to be honest. And you got to kind of wonder if there's some kind of anvil waiting to fall at some point. You always have to pay the piper.
Yeah, probably paying off the stimulus bills.
Yeah, they've been pretty free, pretty free with that, haven't they? When anybody wants to talk, in any innovation discussion I've been in over the last year, the thing that comes up first is, well, we managed to do curbside pickup, so let's talk about reimagined store pickup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think last mile, like just the general reimagination of that, was sort of a ticking time bomb. And then COVID happened and everyone realized, oh, we better really focus on this, right? Like e-com was rising, the environmental concerns were coming more into focus. And then all of that just, it got exasperated. So I think you're seeing that both across retail and food service. They're faced with the same challenges. And clearly, like you said, a lot of players ramped up curbside operations, whether as an individual retailer or a mall owner going across numerous brands. You saw some of that too. And then, I think looking at technology in terms of how, could we use robots or drones in the final sort of last mile? Could we use autonomous vehicles, those kind of things, which any of those investments are going to take a longer, it's going to be a longer-term view to bring those into the fold.
You think about the robots and autonomous vehicles and all that. It didn't really happen, right? Or it doesn't seem like it moved that much further over the last year. And in some cases, we went backwards.
You saw some, I think, more pilots or rollouts, but even if you think about players like Starship out of the States, they suddenly had huge demand, but obviously there's a certain limit to their supply and how much they can ramp up, right? So any of those kind of heavy tech investments is going to take a while to implement. And I think in the States, you're seeing more regulation even against using those type of things on sidewalks, and all of that faces greater regulatory hurdles. I think somewhere like China, this is becoming a bit more commonplace. We see it in our consumer survey where we ask consumers their level of comfortability with drones or robots making that final delivery to them. And only 5% of Chinese consumers say they're against that. And that's wildly different than what we see in the US. So I think there's more of a kind of an acceptance somewhere like that versus the States.
And so to wrap up the last two of the seven, right? It was big gets bigger, and I think it would be safe to say that big did get bigger.
Yeah.
That definitely happened, and technology will be woven into commerce, which you addressed just a little bit in your last answer. So taking that one specifically as we kind of come up on the end of our time today. For you, what new tech, when you think about technology woven into commerce, what new tech happened that really changed the face of retail? Did it?
Yeah, I think you saw greater investments. Like when we surveyed retailers and consumer brands about their tech investments and whatnot. We ran a November survey, and we had done this previous November. We specifically threw some COVID questions in there. From the standpoint, we asked them what they ramped up or slowed down, etc. But even if we look at the questions that were filtered across all years of the survey, there was certainly a bump up we were seeing. But I don't think none of these investments, you can't implement these type of things overnight. In general, like if I look at this year's results or the most recent set, AI and cloud tend to have the greatest focus for a variety of different activities, right now that they're investing or the very near term. Whereas things like AR, VR, blockchain, 5G are more 5-year plus. So I think that helps to also ground expectations and, all the hoopla around blockchain or AR or what have you, that that some of these things are more in the offing rather than tomorrow.
Yeah, I found it interesting that, AR, VR did not get a bigger boost out of this. If you think about, how it really would have been a nice addition when, I'm trying to figure out product and solutions, from a stuck at home position. You would think, well, wow, this technology would really be brought in, but creating the content for that is quite complex, actually. And so, I think it's self-limiting. Yeah, self-limiting how fast you can grow it.
As opposed to like live streaming, like what do you really need for that? If you need that platform, but a camera and somewhere to stream, right?
Yeah, and it turns out you also need some skills in production and some other things to be good at it. Yeah,
you could do some things better for sure to get up and running.
So, I know we're near the time where we should wrap up. Carlos, you've been awful quiet. Did you have anything you wanted to ask Michelle?
No, I've been following you guys. I haven't been feeling excellent today, like great. So thanks for that, Scott. I think you did an amazing job. But the only thing that I checked on your article that was quite interesting, but you mentioned is you mentioned Latin America also as one of the different things and up and coming trends eventually, like Mexico maybe catching up with Brazil, which is where I'm from. So that's quite interesting to me to hear something about that.
Yeah, Latin America is really getting its moment in the sunshine. Last year it was the fastest growing region. In the next 5 years, in our forecast period, we expect they'll be the fastest growing as well. So like you mentioned, Mexico is helping to drive some of this. They have one of the kind of fastest growth rates in terms of absolute value in the next 5 years. I think they're only behind China and the US in terms of the e-com value they'll add or they'll expand. So certainly, I think some of the hurdles that have held back e-commerce and LATAM. So you have security concerns or fraud concerns or those kind of things. Consumers overcame some of those fears this year and gave it a whirl. And so obviously it helped to convert some consumers to this channel.
Maybe just a final note or from my end, from my side here. So I'm in Brazil. I came down here. I'm based in Denmark, but I came to see my parents, and I told Scott that the mood here. I live in São Paulo. It's not great, and there's so many stores that have just closed down and shut. And I don't know. I'm not really optimistic when I see so many stores, just shutting their operations. So I think we talk a lot about digital, but when we look at the bigger, at the greater scheme of things, I don't know. And what do you see in the U.S.? What is the mood like, in terms of jobs and stuff like that?
Yeah, when you look at the overall retail industry, it did contract last year. E-commerce was the bright picture. And, I see it in Chicago. Stores are certainly closing. And I think small retailers, like Scott said, I wrote my column about the big getting bigger. And so some of the smaller ones had challenges and maybe had to come online even for the first time. So unfortunately, there are going to be likely fewer stores and more or less retail jobs as well coming out of this. But I'm trying to think of our forecast data, how quickly. I think it was in 2021 or by 2022, we expected the overall global retail sector to rebound to pre-pandemic levels.
All right.
So it kind of bounce back. Now, it doesn't mean the sales of those smaller players might have executed, might be going to players like Amazon or Walmart or big players like that, right, in the future.
But are you considering also the government stimulus, some sort of packages to help retail get back to the normal?
Yeah, so we consider that when we're doing our estimates. It's just all a matter of when we run our research schedule and what news is known. Obviously, lockdowns. There's a lot of up and down last year in terms of severity of lockdowns. Like the UK had, what are they on their third? I think kind of severe lockdown, which is kind of different than my experience here in Chicago. So, that certainly drove, a more challenging environment for retailers as well there.
Yeah. Well, in Denmark, we have seen, I saw a study, and it said that, small countries or smaller countries, they were able to deal with the COVID situation way better than larger economies like Brazil or the US, because Denmark, there was a decent package for every citizen. So even if you were out of a job, you didn't have to concern, so much about it. Whereas if you compare it to Brazil, it's just like, wow. So there's also, it's difficult here because it depends on the state where you're based, so each state is taking a measure, sort of like to, some states, they have no lockdown. São Paulo is under lockdown now. So
And our reaction in the States was in the US was very state driven, right? Like the lockdowns and the
Still is.
Yeah. Obviously the stimulus is more federally driven. Is widely executed in that manner. But yeah, Texas, how much is Texas open? I know Florida.
100%.
Yeah, and Florida's, COVID doesn't exist anymore as well. But
right.
in Illinois and Chicago, we're still pretty tight.
Yeah. Look, we'll time will tell, how about, if we're dealing with, a fourth wave or not, as a result, hopefully not, hopefully, hopefully the vaccine, number of folks vaccinated, continues to bite into, how quickly new infection can occur, and that vaccines win out. That's what I'm hoping for. I don't want to go back into lockdown. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is probably a good note to stop at. So thank you so much for taking the time, Michelle. It was great to have the opportunity to catch up with you again. And let's not wait so long before we do this again. And Carlos, I'll let you take us out.
Yeah, so thank you, Michelle. It was a pleasure to meet you. A lot of really cool knowledge that you shared with our audience. So yeah, that's I'm wrapping up for today. So thank you very much for this.